So today, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We are about to start our second webinar in a series that we do on Fit for 55. And today we're going to discuss, together with our speakers, what it takes to become a frontrunner. So what the Fit for 55 package can do and the policymakers can do to support leaders of industrial transition in their journey towards the decarbonization. And together with me today, I have Thomas Novak, who's Secretary General of European Heat Pump Association, Julia Cancian, who's Secretary General of European Biogas Association, and Heinz Felder, Senior Vice President at Stora Enso. And MEP Wiesner is sending her apologies. Unfortunately, she lost her voice, which means that she wouldn't be able to participate in the discussion, and we were not able even to record a short video for the event. But I'm confident that together with our speakers, we're going to have a lively discussion, and please be prepared to log into Mentimeter. We're going to have some questions for the audience as well. So the reason for today's conversation is obviously the Fit for 55, but especially this challenge that the frontrunners of industrial transition face, because on the one hand you have the renewable value chain that is being distorted by the recent event in Ukraine, and at the same time we still see this commitment into investments in energy efficiency and switching more to renewables. One of our policy asks is around the high cost of energy. We do participate in the discussions on the ETS, and we observed the vote that it was happening yesterday in industry committee. And today with the speakers, where we have those representing our industry, but those that are also providing the technology and energy for our industry. And the question that we're going to explore is to how to reward those that are leading the charge in the decarbonization. And I'm going to start with Thomas. You know from experience, we're in a conversation on how to move forward on exploring more options to deploy heat pumps in our industry. Every 2 years, we collect case studies on how our industry is actually investing in energy efficiency. So the question to you is, how do you see the policy landscape? What are the main enabling policy tools that you see, and what can policymakers do to help the industry in this transition?
Thank you, Margosha, and thank you also for inviting me for this seminar. Well, I think first and foremost, the title of the seminar has been outmaneuvered by reality, because it's no longer Fit for 55 that, at least for us, governs the discussion, but it's the whole communication around Repower EU. And obviously, as we all know, this is the result of this atrocious war that Russia has waged on Ukraine, and that I guess everybody would want to end as quickly as possible, with a very positive outcome for the Ukrainian people. And that has, of course, a lot of implications also for rebuilding such a country. But to answer your question precisely, we are looking at the 3 different main dossiers. That's the Renewables Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is probably most interesting for industrial applications, and EPBD, which for the industry is not of such a huge relevance. And here we're looking at targets. We're looking at a target for renewable energy, which is supported by us should become 45% of renewables. We're looking at a significant energy efficiency target, 36 or 39%, depends on which energy form you take. And then, of course, we also have supporting pieces of legislation, which is mainly the Electricity Taxation Directive, which is the ETS, which for heat pumps for buildings itself has not been yet opened for the ETS2. This is still under discussion. And we're discussing, what else are we discussing? The VAT Directive. And I think these are the ones that can really bring an immediate impact. If we look at an ETS2, that will not be fast, but it will be essential, because it makes it more interesting to have energy efficient and renewables-based solutions. But if we look at the VAT Directive, which has recently been passed and which foresees the opportunity to reduce the VAT rate for highly efficient heating technology to 0, That would be very relevant if we look at the Energy Taxation Directive. And if we look at examples that are taken on a European level, for example, Germany, which has announced that they will reduce the levies and taxation of electricity that is used for heat pump heating to zero, then you see that automatically both these measures will improve the spark spread because it will become cheaper to use heat pump-based technology for heating and for cooling. And my understanding of your industry is that this is one of the big limiting factors. We shouldn't, however, overlook that there's also quite a lot of personnel shortage. If we need to achieve what we are now asked to achieve, a significant, a very fast and an ambitious upscaling of heat pump deployment, we also need engineers and installers that have to do all this type of work. And there I see some sort of shortage that we have to address separately. We have suggested an EU skills or an EU reskills summit, but I would also say that in industrial and university degree studies, this whole discussion on system design, on heat pump design should be addressed more. I leave it here for the moment.
You mentioned this new objective, and it is true that with the Repower EU, the bar is set so high for your industry to deliver right now.
Say that again, please. The bar is
set very high for your industry to deliver right now.
Well, we would say it's possible, but it has really a very high ambition level. And what I would ask from the policymakers in this context is to not only look at targets, but also to discuss very carefully with the member states regarding the processes on the ground. It is very easy to set a renewables target of 45% or to define a Fit for 55 package. But then if on the ground, the permitting is difficult, or you cannot easily get the permit to drill for a geothermal unit, or you cannot easily get access to waterways if you want to use water as energy source, then this will slow down proceedings and this will actually make it unattractive. And I think what we need to do is we have to review the policies on the ground, the building regulations, etc., to make it attractive to move also from the industry perspective into the application, the deployment of technologies that are more suitable for more renewables uptake and for higher energy efficiency levels. And of course, there's always then going to be the benefit that this means less CO2 emissions for your industry. It means significantly lower cost from the ETS system. And it also means that we will have to import less gas from Russia, but also we will become more independent of gas altogether.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Thomas. Before I move on to Julia, I would like to remind our audience that they can use the chat box to ask questions to our speakers. And yes, over to you, Julia. So you know that biogas is one of the decarbonization options for our industry. There's also a huge potential for on-site biogas production in our facilities. And also for your association and for your industry, the Repower EU plan sets a high target. And how do you see the policies boosting and rewarding the on-site production and production of biogas by your industry in general?
Thank you, Margosia, for the question, and thank you for inviting me today. I really like coming after Thomas because I think that we have many points in common, but what I'm going to say now is going to be a pinch less optimistic than what it is for probably the heat pump industries. So indeed, the Repower EU introduces a 35 billion cubic meter target for biomethane to be reached by the end of 2030. So this is a very ambitious target, but we think it's a credible one. And considering the current situation, we think that is very timely. Just to give you an idea of the biogas and biomethane sector, at the moment, our capacity is of 18 BCM for biogas and 3 BCM, so 3 billion cubic meters for biomethane. So by deploying 35 billion cubic meter biomethane, we could substitute around 20% of current Russian gas that is used in the EU for various applications. So the core is that we need to speed up and make sure that among other end users, industry is also supported adequately in decarbonizing its processes. but also to reutilize its residues, and mobilization is not always that easy. And in particular, of course, since I represent biogas, through anaerobic digestion, and when possible to utilize this kind of renewable gas on site, and or when it's possible contributing to energy generation, selling the excess. But when we look at the scale up of the sector for the future, we target, of course, sustainable feedstocks such as wastewater and sludge, which are pathways that are compatible with those used in the pulp and paper industry. In general, when we look at the policy landscape at the moment, with a high price of allowances and of carbon, this should act as a driver for sustainable energy choices. But it is also important to factor in what is the capital cost of choosing this kind of pathways, so sustainable choices. What is the cost of retrofitting and making sure that the industrial sector remains competitive while investing in these energy choices. So it's basically the old story of the carrot and the stick. At the moment, when looking at the Fit for 55, I am afraid that there is a bit of a disbalance towards the stick and the carrot. So the incentives are not enough. For example, when we look at the revision of the bioenergy and biogas sustainability policy, retroactive changes that are on the table in the greenhouse gas emission saving threshold for bioenergy and biogas, or even the recent proposal to change the definition of what an efficient combined heat and power is, introducing a very unattainable emission performance standard, can be a disincentive actually for industry to invest on this kind of solution. So this is not really optimistic. But on the optimistic side, what I can say is that, of course, targets have been working so far. So more ambitious targets in the Renewable Energy Directive, in the Energy Efficiency Directive, and also in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So considering the heating part as something essential and prioritizing this is absolutely positive. We will see the action plan from the European Commission on the Repower EU coming up very soon in May, and we hope that this new consideration of our sector and utilization of renewable gases for industrial processes and for other end uses is duly taken in consideration within the action plan, and possibly could influence the policies that are already on the table. So
thank you, Julia. That it's a nice mix that you gave us to think about between those positive elements that we see and those negative elements or areas to improve. And I wanted to go to Heinz right now, because when we were discussing this event, we set the bar quite high to talk about the front runners. And I wanted to ask you, how do you actually define a front runner? And do you think that our industry is actually fitting the criteria?
Yes, thank you, Malgosia. Great to be here today, and thank you for the invite. My name is Heinz Felder. I'm the head of technology and investments at Stora Enso, the renewable materials company. We have about 10 billion euros in sales and about 18,000 people working in the EU for us. First, I will talk a little bit about our company and then about the industry. In the case of Stora Enso, all of our products, packaging, paper, biomaterials, and wooden construction products are essentially made from wood. And these products, they substitute fossil products such as plastics packaging in a massive way. So we're talking about 18 million tons a year. Or they also store carbon, such as our wood construction elements, that makes about 2.5 million tons a year. Since years, we have been pushing our innovation agenda. Besides the spectacular developments like carbon neutral anodes for batteries made from lignin, which is one of the wood components, I would like to highlight that we try to find completely renewable solutions from a consumer viewpoint. And just to give a good example, your typical Amazon boxes, here we start to replace styrofoam inserts by fiber molded inserts. And also new development is cellofoam to replace those plastic air pouches. And that is what leadership is about. I mean, go all the way to renewable. We have been active on our carbon neutral roadmap since 2016 when we introduced our first science-based target. Last year, we have increased our science-based target ambitions to cut by half until 2030 our remaining greenhouse gas emissions, not only for Scope 1 and 2. In 2019, there were 2 million tons, but also for Scope 3. Scope 3 is more important. If you think about all the logistics, inbound, outbound, 7 million tons. And we have already one major board mill in Sweden, which is operated completely fossil-free. What I can say is that with the situation now, with the war inflicted by Russia on Ukraine, that encourages us to go even faster. And I'm very much convinced that we will reach that target which we have put ourselves faster than by 2030. Now let's talk about our industry. What is specific? What you have to understand is that we need a lot of heat to dry fiber suspensions. Typically, they have a dryness of only 1 to 2% to our paper, packaging, or pulp products, which makes us an energy-intensive industry. The challenge is the decarbonization of heat. The more biomass you can use in heat generation, the less fossil emissions you will have. That is naturally easier in the Nordic countries, but I think we're already a European industrial frontrunner of renewable heat generation with 62% of our energy needs across the industry. Sustainable biomass, what is it? It means either internally generated fuels such as black liquor from pulp production, bark, production waste, and sludges from the effluent treatment plant. External biomass is typically sawdust from the sawmills or forest residuals such as branches or twigs. We refrain from burning roundwood, which should be really used for material purposes. Also, we do not burn tree trunks, which should be left in the forest to keep the forest soil intact. Remember that 50% of the CO2 stored in forest is stored in the forest soil, and also for biodiversity reasons. Using biomass for heat generation allows the industry to decouple the production growth from its emissions. Many of our mills have cogeneration plants connected to the boilers, which allows also to generate electricity. In this case, it's green electricity. Many pulp mills are thus completely self-sufficient in their energy needs. The industry continues to invest in innovative technologies to improve energy efficiency by installing, one example is indeed heat pumps, switch to renewable energy using biogas, or offer new products that are substitute to fossil-based materials. We're also looking into BECCS or BECCU, which is bioenergy carbon capture, where I believe our industry has a unique position. What we can offer is biogenic CO2 point sources with a total European potential of 65 million tons a year of negative emissions. The industry needs policy stability and predictability to remain competitive in the global market. The energy costs and carbon costs play a major role. We have specific policy asks. If I mention the RED 3, I would like to see a forestry biomass merit order. Roundwood should be really reserved for material use. Does it really make sense that community heating plants today, when they burn biofuels, they use 20% of roundwood? The biomass needs are becoming more and more, but the supply is tight. Then when we talk about green electricity, for years we have been asking, we need more as an industry, it should be cheaper. Our calls are not really heard. So I think that more and more of our industry companies will develop more and more of their own green electricity production as a consequence, especially now what happens in Ukraine. And that means our policy ask changes. I think what we need in all EU countries, a much faster permitting process. And we also need a massive upgrade of the grid connections. Because green electricity, what will it be? It will be in our industry mostly wind and solar. The next one is, now I come to what Julia has mentioned. In our industry, the easy steps of decarbonization have been done. Now it gets harder. More efforts and capex are required. There, I think carbon contracts for difference can make a difference, a positive one. They can be powerful incentives to go further in decarbonization investment projects and remain competitive in a global market. So it is when you go what is beyond the benchmark. So you promise something, and for that promise you get something in return, which allows you then, for instance, to invest in a biogas installation or in heat pumps. The same is true for BECCS, bioenergy carbon capture. Carbon certificates will be necessary to pave the way, and they should be linked with reverse auctions. This can really assure a cost-effective way to build up negative emissions, and also for the EU to avoid sinking subsidies into other and maybe too visionary and too costly carbon removal methods. Key element of the policy framework is the ETS with the higher climate ambition. We need stronger carbon leakage protection, free allocation, and indirect carbon cost compensation. There are parts of the EU Parliament wanting to eliminate installations which have less than 5% remaining fossil emissions. This would have, in my eyes, a contradictory effort in our industry. We have many mills which are already below the 5% threshold through massive investments and efforts in the past. Why should they be punished for going all the way to being fossil-free? And with that question, I turn back to you, Małgosia.
Thank you, Heinz. I think that you gave a very good overview of many different challenges and successes that we've achieved in the industry. And I see that in the chat box, we have some movement, which is a good thing. And actually, there is a first question to Julia coming from Anita, which she asks, facing raw material shortages, we are now have ambitious circular objectives as well. How do you see the competition between biogas and carbon-based building blocks from side streams?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we looked at the potential for sustainable feedstock mobilization to get to 2030, and we basically ran a bit of a study to understand what are the resources that we will need to get to 35 billion cubic meter, but in general to a scale up of the sector. And the numbers that we came up with the single kind of feedstock are completely untapped potential that at the moment are not in competition. I'm talking in general about the biogas sector, not only the one that's that can be used by the pulp and paper industry. So manure is the first resource. Wastewaters and urban wastewater treatment is almost completely untapped. Landfill and waste has also a lot of potential for growth. And when it comes to agriculture, agroecological practices such as sequential cropping will be a big part of what we can produce in the next 10 years. So I see a hand also from Anita. So
yes, but it disappeared. Yeah.
But maybe if
I wanted to applaud, but I didn't have that option, so sorry. I only had raising a hand, so but well, anyhow, good answer. Thank you, Julia.
You're welcome.
And so I also think Julia before. Oh, Heinz, yes, you wanted to react as well.
I think Anita, still you made a good comment because this is at least for our industry, Julia, an option. We can make, and that's what we see through pyrolysis, we can turn a sludge into biochar. And that opens then options, exactly what Anita said, that would be for material use. And if we think about a hierarchy, you always have to think, at least we believe, first, what are good material uses for biochar before you start burning it. Burning is, of course, always an option.
No, I completely understand. This is something that is very much discussed, at least in the biogas industry. And we know that there are a lot of advancement in pyrolysis and gasification, but also using the digestate. So we reduce the residues or the feedstock first, and then the digestate that needs to be managed can be pyrolyzed. So in this respect, there is also a possibility of doing both things without having a proper competition.
That's true.
So yes, with this, I can only encourage you to put your questions in the chat box. They do sparkle conversation. And now I wanted to move to a question to our audience. So please go to menti.com. I'm going to share the slides with a question before we move to a panel discussion that should also inform a little bit what we're going to discuss. So the question to our audience, and you can find it on menti.com using the code 16636599, is what is the biggest hurdle on your journey to become a front runner? And we thought of 4 options. Probably there's more. Probably there's more incentives as well on opportunities to become a front runner. But yes, do you think that constantly changing policy and regulation is the biggest challenge? Or maybe it's difficult to access funding, or there's lack of financing, lack of innovative technologies, or maybe there is a limited knowledge about the options, both on the industry side, so on the manufacturing side, but also when it comes to those that are actually providing the technologies. So I see that there already 2 people managed to log into menti.com. We're around 30 online. So let's aim at having 20 people answering the question so we can see what's the feeling in the room on the biggest hurdles. So far the policy and lack of financing, access to financing is winning, is heading.
Małgosia, maybe I can use the time while we are waiting for the 20, and I understand we will not continue before 20 have cast their vote, so please everybody do that. But what I find missing is this whole discussion about the economic attractiveness, because when I talk to my people that build the big heat pumps that could be used in paper mills and the paper process, in the paper industry, then they say very often we are not seen as economically attractive because we're not attractive enough. It's not something that wouldn't pay off in 5 or 6 years, but very often the competition inside the paper, but also any other industry, is around what can you do in 2 years or what can you do in 3 years. If you don't do it in 1 year, you're fired because you're not improving the efficiency, right? That's not even an investment. If you do it in 2 years, then you have to compete with other projects that could also deliver some sort of value to the company. And the same for 3 years. If it's more than 3 years, most of the time, companies don't do it. So from our perspective, if somebody wants to be an innovator, then the cost of energy, as harsh as it sounds, have to be on a level that makes it attractive. And in the past, gas was very cheap, so that wasn't interesting. I'm finding it very interesting to hear from Heinz that he says, okay, we will build our own power plants. And if these are integrated power plants, maybe then they will actually have electricity produced that they can then use for efficient use of heat pumps in the paper process. And maybe just on the side, we know now, and we have actually made the cooperation with SEPI quite innovative, because we are looking at compressors and heat pumps that can deliver to what the paper industry needs, 160, 180 degrees centigrade and high pressure steam. And I think we are short. We are short two votes on before you click.
No, but thank you for mentioning that and making sure and this challenge of making sure that there's operating costs are still attractive and the cost of energy plays a role. And I see that Heinz wants to react.
Yes, first of all, yes, you're completely right. Energy efficiency is, I can say it for our company, it's about short-term paybacks. Very clear. For instance, we have an energy fund every year, and yes, there's a certain hurdle rate. If they pass the hurdle rate with the proposals, that's fine. And we still find every year many proposals. And unfortunately, so far, you're right. All the heat pump proposals we have had internally, they didn't pass the bar. Also, what I was saying about that lots of companies are thinking about their own electricity production. That is because we really think long-term in this industry. And if I think long-term, especially in the area of paper and board machines, it's about true electrification. which means then we would go to a solution where in the first place, well, why would you need complicated power plants? You can do with electrical boilers. You can generate the steam. And in the second phase, you could also imagine then to replace the dryer section of a board machine then by electrical dryers. So these are really the big long-term drivers for us.
So are you saying you wouldn't dry with steam anymore? You would dry, how do you do that? Or I'm not enough in this industry, but would you be able to replace the steam with some sort of electric warm air dryer, or how is that then happening?
And that would come in a second step. Of course, that's a huge remodeling then of the dryer section. So that the first action, and there are already quite a few mills who have electrical boilers as backup boilers. So when the electricity price is really low, then they start them up. But that is still then the conventional way to make paper or board.
But to discuss more the breakthrough technologies for paper drying, we have Energy Solutions Forum, and together with Anita, we're discussing all the different options, including paper making without water, so you wouldn't need to dry anything. But going back to the discussion on different hurdles and on this journey to decarbonization. So from our little survey, it seems that, yes, the funding and financing won slightly by 2 votes. But going back to our panel with the question, so is the policy that we're discussing right now, the different options, incentives, also the sticks that Julia mentioned, is it a barrier or is it an opportunity at the end of the day for the industries to transform? So I'll start with Thomas.
I think it's always easy to say it's both, but it would be an opportunity if it applied to everybody. I think that's a very clear statement that we can say. If there is the same requirement for the different types of industries, then it would be an opportunity because it moves us towards more energy efficiency, more renewables, and less dependence on fossil gas of any type of origin. It would also trigger innovation. I'm quite convinced that what most people that I talk to, they are very rational when it comes to calculating the return on investment of a certain measure. So if the requirement is high, and we can see it also for the paper industry now, if ETS is reaching a certain level, and I'd say it has passed that certain level, that makes people very, very interested in looking into more energy efficient solutions and becoming innovators themselves. We have in other industries that we talk to the situation that the industry doesn't even want to have it known. So the clients of the big heat pump manufacturers, they do not want anybody else to know about it because they say, this is our advantage and it's our production cost benefit, and we don't want our competition to jump on the same train. Of course, that can hold for a certain number of months, maybe a year, but not much longer because people talk. But we see that that this innovation is triggered by higher cost.
Julia, the same question to you.
And the answer will be very different, I'm afraid. So I think, yeah, policy can and absolutely must help, especially at this time. So on the EU level, we need to see ambitious targets. So what is happening with the Fit for 55 is a good step forward in all senses. But also at the EU level, we need to see how to, for example, disseminating existing best practices on how to overcome bottlenecks that we see at national and regional level. And it was mentioned before quite a couple of times, permitting and authorization. And at the moment, we see that for our industry, this is the main problem and the main bottleneck that can delay a project as long as 5-8 years in certain countries. So this is something that needs to be absolutely tackled, and policy can be a key driver for this. So we hope that the guidelines that will come from the European Commission will be helpful in this sense. At the same time, when we look at policy, especially from the EU level, we need to avoid certain over-regulation because certain targets and certain objectives can be better achieved at local level. And from the EU side, we also need to provide disruption in one side, so saying, okay, this is the 2050 target and we need to be climate neutral. But at the same time, we need to provide also the needed stability on the goals so that we can mitigate investor risks. And this is particularly true when it comes to the biogas sector or the bioenergy sector in general.
Thank you, Julia. And I see Thomas' hand is up. You're on.
If I may, I'm really tempted to answer directly because you said your answer is so different. If I understand you right, then you say that there is a certain potential and even a certain need to solve issues on the local level. And I would actually, at least in this, if I take it from the heat pump industry, for the big heat pumps, this is a European market. And I would really not want to have things taken care of at the local level, because if we would have a local CO2 price or if we would have a local energy efficiency target, then we would start to have a competition between member states. And I think in this context,
don't get me wrong, I completely agree on that. I'm talking with my sector in mind and with the overlapping of agriculture, environmental legislation, and sourcing mainly, which is done on a regional and local level. And this is why I'm saying that the geography matters. But this is something that is probably more applicable to bioenergy and biogas than it is to heat pumps. So we can agree.
You know what's really interesting? Then let's agree on it, and let's move to a different level, because then I would come back to Anita's initial point and to Heinz's comment saying that, oh, we can also do biochar out of the waste of the paper production. Then the question really is, what would be the best energy system that we could build to deliver heating and cooling and electricity to the paper industry? And if Heinz says, okay, but for us it's better to use the biochar and we don't burn the biomass residue, and then we could come in and say, yeah, and then we have some big heat pumps for you. So maybe we can make a better, a more stable, a more resilient system if we communicate better.
That's a great idea on the communication. I think that this is why it was good to have the three different sectors together, because there are some synergies that we can build on also outside of the industry. I think that, Heinz, I wanted to move to you when it comes to the place of our sector playing with the different technologies that are out there, but also serving wider community and other sectors on their way to decarbonize, because it's about the links to district heating, it's about decarbonizing transport sector or other industries with the excess heat that we have. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, first of all, I think for the permitting, I see now movement. We had a very encouraging meeting yesterday about wind power in Sweden. There was really the situation that to install a windmill, it takes 7 to 8 years. But now they're seriously reconsidering the permitting process to cut it down to 2 to 3 years, and that will be a game changer. And it shows also when there's a crisis like this terrible war, then also EU and member states are moving fast, and that is positive. I can also say, as let's be more imaginative. I did some Easter reading, a book I can really recommend. It's called The Ministry of the Future. And it really rocks you. It really makes you think differently about what is going on. And the thinking it triggered for me, Julia, when you were saying, yes, we need capital. I mean, there's so much capital around. There are so many investors willing to invest into ESG. And if we can somehow link this to carbon removal, to carbon reduction, here we're really talking now about the carrot, not about the stick. That would be fantastic. And then we need new policy ideas. And so the carbon contract for difference, which we have been pushing from the German Industry Federation, that is, for me, it's one example of such a carrot. So that's one thing. Then, Malgosia, you were asking about, and that's a good point. How can we be part then of a wider network? And I think we will see more and more those clusters. And the clusters, they can be in the vicinity. One example is our mill in Langerbrugge in Belgium, where it is so that we have the possibility, we generate a lot of steam. And in the vicinity is a plant of Volvo making cars. They have been able then to completely stop their own heat production using our renewable heat. So it's a double success for them, going away from a fossil burner, and for us then supplying the heat. And we will see much more of it. This cluster thinking, it is also then the same if you think about carbon capture. That will be done in clusters to collect the CO2, to store it. They really need a network approach.
Indeed. And actually, we have a question from Thomas to you. So, Thomas, do you want to ask it yourself?
Yeah, I can do myself. So you mentioned this carbon contracts for difference, and I think this is an interesting concept. To my knowledge, it has never been. It's very typical in electricity generation. It's not very typical, and is not discussed much in heat generation. Do you think that that would make sense? Likewise, to say, okay, then we apply the same process, the same approach, but only for the provision of heat.
Yeah, conceptually, we've been thinking it through, absolutely. And you need to define what is the current state of the art. And then you move to the next level.
And in my understanding, the state of the art is a gas boiler,
using,
right? Or
it can be using heat pumps. And then that's why now we're with the carrot. Right now, we have the situation, as I said before, normally, yes, the heat pumps that's a question of fast payback and that it doesn't pass the bar. But if you think it now in the context of a carbon contract for difference, then it's you change your viewpoint completely. And here you can also bring in other capital sources, what I mentioned before. There is always the two parts. The carbon contracts for difference, it needs also funding. But I do believe there's enough funding from private investors there who really want to go green. And this is important because our industry is not only energy intensive, but also capital intensive. I'm also responsible for coordinating all the CapEx. And I mean, every year I could ask for more CapEx, but I will not get it. And that is the reason why we need to think about how do we get more funding into our industry to go completely carbon neutral.
But do you have enough human resources to execute all these projects? Because I received recently a few calls from big capital providers, investment funds, etc., and they say, where can we invest? This was the question, right? They said we have €1 million or 2 or 3, or it didn't seem that there is a limit of available funds. There was a limit of places to put that money with a certain, of course, return on investment in mind.
Yeah, I can confirm the resources we have both internally and also externally, because you need the suppliers, you need the engineering consultants. Of course, yes, right now it's a stretch situation, but that's for other reasons. As you all know, the supply chains, they are terrible. And to get certain materials, components, this is now a new, totally different world. But still, what I can say is, and that's not only Stora Enso, but all companies have a pipeline of, I would say, fantastic projects to grow on the one end, to produce more renewable materials, to replace plastics, to replace other fossil construction elements. And we have also fantastic projects to go in further in decarbonization.
But I guess it goes back to we're ending in the same point, that it's all about communication, because there are projects and there is willingness on the one side from the industry, but it seems like on capital markets as well to invest in those decarbonized solutions from
yeah,
what
that
we're
is
hearing.
also a message to the politicians. I mean, it's all good, the EU funding, but that is typically for innovation. It's for piloting, it's for scale up, it's the first industrial. But what happens then now? And that is when, for me, the music starts, when you do the massive rollouts. When you go from your pilot heat pump, but you want to see millions of them. How do you fund that?
And before we move to that question, because we still have another question to the panel. There's one more question to the audience that I hope that it's going to guide our second part of the conversation. And it was not meant to be a competition. However, it might sound like this. So we wanted to ask our audience, what are the main renewable sources that you're using or considering? And I see that some of you already started answering it. We obviously there might be some other options out there. We looked at biomass, biogas/biomethane, renewable electricity, hydrogen, and solar thermal. And so far we have, yes, biomass is winning, but I guess it also goes back to what Heinz was mentioning about the energy mix in our industry. And yes, so our panelists are quite active on the chat. It would be nice if the audience would also share some questions to our speakers. So yeah, so while we're looking at the answers that are being provided right now, we touched upon so many different topics and so many different angles to look at the energy transition and the transformation of different sectors. We talked about communication, financing, permitting. We talked also about the changing policy landscape, because yes, we started last year with Fit for 55, but in the meantime, there are so many different proposals, strategy that were coming out. So how do you prioritize? And I'll start with Thomas, because it becomes a maze of different policy options, options for innovations, options for investing. So how do you see prioritizing and rewarding those options that are going to be beneficial for the transition?
Do you mean that, are you asking that to my industry, or do you want my opinion on what the Commission should prioritize?
Both. Let's say both.
You're not making it easier, my gosh. So I would say, I do think that the answer is pointing to a similar direction. If I need to ask myself, what should the Commission do to benefit innovators, then it is, I repeat what I've said before, it's this cost situation. We need to have an ETS to at least to have some financing, and of course that doesn't apply so much to industrial applications, but it will be helpful. We need to have really probably most prominently a revision of energy taxation, and that what is in the pipeline at the moment, what we see, what the Commission is proposing, looks promising. So if we could have much lower taxation levels, that's part of the proposal now, for electricity versus oil and gas, that will make it more attractive. If we could have, and I dare say, a higher CO2 price, that will be attractive. So this idea that makes it more attractive for industry to be innovative, I think that is very relevant to drive the markets forward. If I look at our own industry, they will react to that. And from their perspective, what's also important and what's also very relevant is the continued communication on the Commission side to be very clear that this energy transition is not going away again. Nobody wants to make mistakes. So it's very important to show that that all these measures that have started now will also be executed, and that we're not ending at 45% renewables, but maybe we even go to 50% of renewables, that we're not ending at 36% energy efficiency, but even beyond that. It has to keep in mind what industry can do, because I would agree to Heinz, there is a stretch in capacity at the moment, and that's not getting better if everything should happen at the same time. And that's what I find also at the moment, the whole Repower EU discussion is very helpful to the industry. But ideally, the Commission would like to have all these measures to be impactful by fall. And that's a bit too little amount of time to bring meaningful action forward. So I think we can start something now, then it has to continue, and then we will see impacts in 3 to 5 years on a significant scale.
Thank you, Thomas. Julia, how do you see the priorities?
I really like the idea of Thomas of putting down a trajectory, a sort of a pathway, so that there is not only an inception and then a plan that that says where we have to go, but that follows up in time, in length. And this is something that we have also discussed internally. So the communication, the Repower EU was really a great signal. And we're hoping that the action plan in May will substantiate what the trajectory needs to be in the medium and long term, so that investors know where they're going, and they know that their growth and their financial efforts will be rewarded and will continue to be rewarded. So this is absolutely something important. Measures. Other measures such as, of course, the cost that are impacting directly on the cost of energy are absolutely needed. On our side, when we think at large at our industry, also the idea of decarbonizing so mandating decarbonization of gas is something that we think that is absolutely vital. So having a greenhouse gas emission intensity for gas would also give the right trajectory for the sector to develop in the future and to get to complete decarbonization in 2050. So these are absolutely key measures. But I think that we will see better next month what is on the table, and we will take it from there.
Thank you, Julia. Heinz.
Of course, that's a very wide question, so I just will pick one topic which makes me spin my head a bit, and that is the biomass availability, which is limited. And now, when you hear about, for instance, from the chemicals industry, that they would love to take a lot of biomass to make bioplastics, and they say, well, if we go to the max, then we can have 7% of our plastics into bioplastics. And that is something, well, if I were a politician, I would ask what is actually in the end is better. So it comes down to the merit order. Is it then using really renewable materials replacing plastics? Because after all, even if it's called bioplastic, it still is plastic. So it still will end up somewhere in the ocean. And this is now the question. In our industry, we're able to replace 20% of the plastics over the next 10 years until 2030. But we need the biomass. If the chemical industry is eyeing for the same thing, is that efficient? So that's one aspect I would like to see.
Yes, coming a little bit outside of our energy bubble and talking more about materials and material efficiency. But they're all interconnected. So I see that our audience is shy today. We don't see, at least I don't see any other questions from the audience, and we have 5 minutes left. So maybe just a quick round, because I think that we did agree in our conversation among each other on certain things. So that my last question is like, how do you see the role of communicating between the industry in this transition? It's like being a front runner. It's also has this element of thought leadership, of communicating between the industries about what is needed and what is available. So I'll start with Thomas.
It's obviously of very utmost importance, and let me use that opportunity to cite what we are doing between CEPI and EHPA. This communication that we have started and this exchange of opinions and of technology feasibility has helped us to move forward, I would say, because for the audience, We have started about 3 years ago with a joint meeting where the Heat Pump Association has approached the paper industry to say, what do you really need? And the answer was pretty much continuously 180 degrees and high pressure steam. And that wasn't possible at that point in time. We are moving forward in a direction where new heat pumps can probably deliver this 180 degrees and 10 bar steam will be possible. But in the context of exchange, we have also asked, what is the lowest possible temperature at which you can make steam, and can you maybe use different approaches to deliver the solution? Of course, that will require pretty much a redesign of the paper mills that we know of today. But Heinz mentioned it many times that there is a long-term perspective, and I think if we continue this type of interaction and communication, first internally, then we can also present afterwards that there are possible solutions that are inside of a circular economy and maybe even inside of a circular energy economy. So this cooperation between the different parts of the value chain will in the end contribute to a sustainable and resilient energy system.
Thank you, Thomas. And then Julia, how do you see, because you also talked about best practice sharing. Do you think that this conversation across the industries to talk about the solutions that are needed is something that is part of being a front runner?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, and at least for my sector, this is actually a necessity, because we are sitting across in the crossroad of different sectors. On one side, waste, agriculture, but also industry, as this is the case, and certain material can be used by several outlets. So coordination in this sense and communication is vital to the sector, even without the objective of being a front runner. So this is sort of our daily bread, basically. But with keeping in mind the objective of being more competitive and more innovative, it is absolutely needed that we sit down and talk, as today we did informally, but also that technology provider on the supply side and the final users are meeting to understand what are the technological barriers, the administrative ones, and they come up together with common solutions.
Thank you, Julia. And Heinz, you're the last one today to answer the question.
Yes, of course. It's a wide topic. I mean, if you think about where we're coming from as an industry, and we were basically a very snobbish and conservative industry, too successful, I would say, for decades. Basically, we did not communicate at all to the outside. We were basically talking to ourselves, and that could not end well. But I think there was a really shake-up moment then in starting in the early 2000s when the paper, I'm here talking about graphic paper consumption, was really going down like hell, and we had to reinvent ourselves, which fortunately was possible. Now it's the packaging which has even made up the losses in graphic paper consumption, even more than that. But it was also another wake-up moment. I would say that it forced us to not only talk to other industries, also to be more specific in our policy asks, but also talk to NGOs and listen to them. And for me, that's more than rewarding. I myself have built up now a network with companies in the steel industry, the cement industry, and the chemicals industry, but also talking to NGO representatives. I'm now part of this zero emission platform. That really, it can shake you, it can make you rethink, but in the end, it will make us much, much stronger, I would say.
Thank you, Heinz.
We're on a good track, Małgosia.
That's the optimistic end of our discussion today. We went through ups and downs, but I wanted to thank very warmly all of our speakers. The conversation today was quite lively. We touched upon different elements of what it means to become a front runner, how the policy can help, how sometimes policy can make our lives more difficult when it comes to applying innovation or thinking of innovation. yes, the optimistic part is that we keep growing as separate as industries, and there are synergies across our industries to work on industrial transformation and decarbonization, the new goals for 2030 and 2050. And yes, I wanted to thank also our audience who participated a little bit more than maybe they thought that they would. And I wanted to invite you to our next seminar in a few weeks. We're going to discuss different aspects of the Fit for 55 package. Now they're going to be at a different stage of negotiations yet again. So have a good afternoon and see you around.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.